COPWATCH, policing the police every single day.
Say hi, Andy. I'm recording you.
Alright, you get the whole thing, right?
I got you.
Ocean City cops are not people.
Yes, they are. You know what's really criminal?
What's that?
Those knee-high socks.
I know, but that's what the brown shirts wore.
Hey, SHERI, this is SHERI COPWATCH, and I got to make comment on this before I do the screen read. This is the biggest piece of shit motherfucking rag out there in America for a newspaper. Jesus Christ, this fucking writer, Daniel Sutphin, didn't even bother to research the bullshit that these fuckers are saying in City Hall, where they literally said, I interrupted a fucking church service by the water. Absolute fucking lie. Jesus Christ, I know exactly where they're talking about. That church service is always done. And this fucking moron fucking writer that doesn't tell the truth and slanders and defames illegally. He didn't talk about how they illegally talked about wanting to fucking sue me and the other guy for free speech. He didn't talk about how they fucking illegally talked about how they're going to arrest me for free speech and they're going to call it disturbing the peace. This newspaper is the biggest piece of shit rag out there. Take it. Don't even take it. It's not even worth you spending your goddamn money. And if you do see it, put it on the bottom of the fucking bird cage for the birds to shit on me, because that is all that it is worth. Motherfucking defaming, slandering ass piece of shit commie newspaper.
Appellate Court reviewing city's sign code. Punta Gorda continues to enforce indecent language sign rule. By Daniel Sutphin. Staff writer. Punta Gorda sign code limiting indecent language is currently under review in the Charlotte County Circuit Civil Appeals Court. Since the ordinance was approved by the City Council on June 2, some free speech activists have protested the code, claiming it violates the First Amendment. Andrew Sheets and Richard Massey have both challenged the legality of the code since being found in violation multiple times while protesting the law. Sheets, who is fighting 4 citations during a July 28 Code Enforcement Board meeting, was fined $2,500, while Massey, who is contesting only 1 citation, was charged to pay $500. City Attorney David Levin recently told the City Council that a motion to stay of enforcement against both men is going to be presented to the city's Code Enforcement Board during an October 27 meeting. In view of the fact that the code challenge is now really in the courts, I will be recommending to the Code Board to grant the stay as it relates to those existing violations, Levin said. That saves the city additional legal fees among other actions. Levin went on to say that the city will continue to enforce the sign code regardless of it being under review. The city certainly will enforce any new violation by those gentlemen or anyone else found to be in violation of the sign code, which remains lawful until a court of competent jurisdiction decides otherwise, he said. Mayor Lynn Matthews asked Levin if the terms of the sign code can be applied to other recent disturbances in the city. There's one group that has a church service in Gilchrist Park every Sunday and the service has been blatantly disrupted on a number of occasions, Matthews said. Levin said that to the best of his knowledge, those were verbal disruptions, not necessarily with respect to signs. Matthews also referenced another disturbance during the weekend of October 16 to 17 in which a person held a sign of a fetus protesting abortion on the west and east sides of the US 41 bridges. There is a fair amount of free speech that is protected by the U.S. Constitution, Levin said. For creating the city's new sign code, Levin said he advised the City Council on defining obscenity, fighting words, and indecent speech listed in the code based on case law. Those are the areas that I think we are comfortable with regulating because courts have said that those 3 categories are clearly not protected by First Amendment rights. Other things that we might find distasteful, however, are protected. Levin went on to say that he is not aware of any other sign code violations from either Massey or Sheets since the initial Code Enforcement Board citations were issued, which are on appeal. The motions to stay for the violations against both Massey and Sheets will be discussed at the city's next Code Enforcement Board meeting, which is set for 9 a.m. October 27 at Council Chambers, 326 West Marion Avenue, Punta Gorda. Email, daniel.sutphin@yourzone.com. Copyright, C. 2021 Suncoast Media Group, edition October 23, 2021. Powered by TNAVIA. Oh.
Thank you. Cool.
That being said, this is still my last opportunity to address the City Council as presently constituted. And I wanted to thank you for your patience and understanding as it relates to the adoption of the new sign code. What gets lost in the debate as to whether or not using the F word on a sign that's visible by children is protected by the First Amendment is that since 2015, when the U.S. Supreme Court adopted its decision in Reed versus City of Gilbert, our previously existing sign code, which was based on content-based categories, was viewed to be unconstitutional because it was an infringement on free speech. In order to be constitutional, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that the ordinances relating to signs needed to be content neutral. And so the code that you adopted, obviously with debate as you went through the process, makes it much greater opportunity for speech to be presented on the signs that are within the city of Punta Gorda, particularly, for example, with respect to political signs. And so rather than repeal the ordinance as was suggested earlier this morning, the ordinance that you adopted greatly expands the rights of free speech within the city of Punta Gorda, and I think you should be commended for that. So thank you. That's all I have.
I was asked a question, as long as we're on this subject, is there any way to pursue civil action against people who are blatantly opposing the sign ordinance and being continuous disruptions? Well, all right, so the immediate answer to your question is no. The disruptions that you may be referring to, from what I've heard during our staff meetings, for example, are more in the nature of verbal disruptions, not necessarily with respect to the signs that violated our sign code. To my knowledge, there has been no further violation of the sign codes by the two people who received orders against them by the Code Enforcement Board, which are now on appeal. And so to the extent that there aren't any new violations of the sign code, and that's now in the court with respect to their challenge that our ordinance is unconstitutional, we'll ultimately get a decision by the court with respect to that. A motion to stay enforcement against those two individuals will be presented to the Code Enforcement Board at the next Code Enforcement Board meeting. In view of the fact that it's now really in the courts, we'll be recommending to the Code Enforcement Board to grant the stay as it relates to those existing violations. And there's two new violations that were made prior to the notice of appeal being filed, which we're going to continue until after a decision is rendered by the courts. That saves the city additional legal fees and what have you. Certainly the city will enforce any new violation by those gentlemen or anyone else, which is a violation of the sign code, which in fact remains lawful until a court of competent jurisdiction decides otherwise. So I've talked briefly to the to the police department about the opportunity to deal with disruptions, public disturbances, for example, which are unrelated to the sign code. And so if there's a need to be more aggressive with respect to the enforcement of disturbing the peace, that can still be done. And again, that's not related to the sign code, that's related to verbal expression, which our ordinance does not address.
I ask that for a number of reasons. There is one group that has a church service in Gilchrist Park every Sunday, and the church service has been disrupted, blatantly disrupted, on a couple of occasions. I understand that police would have to be called and they have to witness it firsthand before they can do anything about it. That's one instance. We had the instance at the school where the signage was outside the school entrance, and we also had one over the weekend for an hour on one side of the bridge and an hour on the other side of the bridge with a fetus picture. And I'm sorry, I just think that we're breaching the acceptability threshold.
Well, as the city attorney, I can only advise that there is a fair amount of free speech that is in fact protected by the U.S. Constitution. I've simply advised the city council that with respect to obscenity as we've defined it, which is based on case law, fighting words as we've defined it, as based on case law, and indecent speech as we've defined it, those are the areas that I think we are comfortable in regulating, because the courts have said those three categories, although it may be content-based, are clearly not protected by First Amendment rights. Other things that we might find distasteful, however, are protected.
Okay.
Now, there may be, one of the things we were talking about is regardless of what's being said, if someone's on a bullhorn that's turned up, say that 6 blocks away, it's waking people up, and I'm being very facetious, but does that disturb the peace in some manner, regardless of what's being said, aside from the discussion of the content of what's being said? Is there something that's too loud that we can try to prevent if that occurs? And that's a whole different discussion, I believe, than this.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, under council member comments, I have a few things.